When we went to director Kevin Smith's house, he had a lot more to say about Star Wars than what you saw in the show. Take a look.
I remember the first time I saw Star Wars, it had been out for a little bit. I wasn't like one of these, I was there on first day. Like, kids had started talking about it in my class. And, you know, by that point, it was religion. And, you know, there'd been space things before, like Star Trek more recently as a TV show. But this was a completely different beast. I don't know, it felt like it was made for us, exactly. Plus those effects, which nowadays most people are like, now we've seen Spider-Man swing through New York. But you gotta remember, it was 1977. They showed us Millennium Falcon whipping through space, being chased by TIE fighters. Crazy, like you'd never seen anything like it. Death Star blowing up, you know, the cantina, all of these things were just programmed right into my DNA and my genetic code first time I saw that, and I became a fan. I remember John Kovic had the early bird Star Wars figures collector pack. Like, you had to mail away for it, and had certain characters in it, like R2-D2, Luke, Darth Vader, I think, and maybe Princess Leia. I forget what the exact formation was. But I remember being like, they make toys of this as well? We can keep going and play? The smartest thing they ever did was make the action figures, because you can keep telling the adventure over and over and create your new ones, but you only had to do that for a couple of years before they were going to give us a brand new adventure, man, with Empire Strikes Back. And I'll be honest with you, as much as I love Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back was my religion. Because at this point, I'd built up a fervency for Star Wars. And couldn't wait to see the second film. So even if the second film sucked, I was going to love it, but it was fantastic. Second film is widely regarded by a lot of people as the best of the original trilogy. Irvin Kershner's direction, the characters, where we go with Han Solo, the dramatic ending and whatnot. All of it, the cliffhanger, all of it is, you know, as much as Star Wars was designed to infect your genetic code, Empire Strikes Back remade you. You are now part of this covenant of something far larger than yourself. You know, there are fans around the world for it, and you were family with these characters. You met them in Star Wars, but all of a sudden, you know, you're moving on. Think about it. Like, when I was a kid, I had sequels with Planet of the Apes, but you didn't follow Taylor necessarily. So here was an ongoing series, unlike James Bond, where, you know, in the next adventure, completely new people except for James Bond, and sometimes James Bond was completely different. Star Wars is a movie where when they give us a sequel, it's kind of episodic like television. You're like, hey, here's all our old friends. Princess Leia's back, and Luke Skywalker's back, and Han Solo's back, and hey, she's kissing this guy now, and hey, the Wookiee's back, and Darth Vader's now hunting the kid. What does he give a shit about Luke Skywalker? You know, by the end of the movie, you figure out why. But it was those old friends, man. Seeing them again in Empire, suddenly you're bonded for life. You know, I was young enough for that to be the center of my entire existence. Thank God my parents weren't super rich and whatnot. They were lower middle class. So I got toys, but not so much that I was spoiled. Because it forced me to have friendships with other people that had Star Wars toys, like my friend John Kovic, or Pete King. One of my favorite people in the world, Pete King, would come down from Brooklyn. And Pete, you know, was lavished with all the best Star Wars toys. His parents got him everything. So I would have a lot of stuff, but he had everything. So together, you know, even though I didn't have, I had an X-Wing, he had an X-Wing, now we had two X-Wings. Later on, I would have an AT-AT, he would have an AT-AT. We can really relive Hoth. You know, sometimes you get lucky. I had 2 stormtroopers, he had 5. We got our scene going now. We combine our. Spent a long time playing Star Wars with old Pete King. Pete King, one day, you know, we just stopped hanging out. Of course, we grew up. I got interested in girls, not Star Wars so much. You know, his trips down to the shore became shorter and shorter. His parents would still come down, but Pete was like, I'm gonna stay in the city, and got into like punk rock and stuff like that, you know. And so we didn't play Star Wars, obviously, in our late teens, early 20s and stuff. But right before I made Clerks, or right around the time I made it, or right after it was done, you know, I never got to see Pete. I remember seeing, last time I saw Pete King was right before we were making Clerks, and I saw him as I was leaving my house across the street. I was like, hey man, what are you doing? We chit-chatted for a bit, and I was like, I'm working at this place, Quick Stop. I might make a movie there and stuff. He's like, a movie? And then that was it, never saw him again. He was going to a club in New York, hear some music with some friends, stepped off the curb, got hit by a cabin, killed, just like that. So, you know, when Pete died, it was one of those things where I was like, Jesus Christ, there goes my whole childhood. Naturally, of course, we always think of ourselves, how death impacts us. And it was weird because I was like, well, all the romance and love that I have for Star Wars, my childhood link to Star Wars was kind of severed. So Star Wars became more of theoretical or a source of comedy or something to talk about in the movies. And, you know, in Clerks, we do that. And it was very successful and stuff. So from there forward, I was like, oh, I'm putting Star Wars in everything I do. And it was at a time when not a lot of people were talking about Star Wars at all. Whenever I'd sit down and talk about Clerks, like I'd be at Cannes. I'll never forget this. We're at Cannes Film Festival. Sit down for my first interview after the first screening of Clerks. And it was a French journalist. And the dude, I don't speak French, and it's the first time I'm speaking, probably the first time I'm speaking to a Frenchman in my entire life, right? How am I going to talk to this guy about this movie about living in New Jersey? Like, what does this Frenchman know about tending a register in fucking New Jersey? How could he possibly relate to this movie? We don't have a translator. How's this going to go? First thing out of his mouth, he goes, the Star Wars? I said, yeah, Star Wars. And he goes, Jay and Silent Bob? And I'm like, yes. He goes, they are not R2-D2 C3PO? And I was like, oh my God, that's funny, man. I don't even thought of that. I guess you're right. They are kind of the R2-D2 C3PO of this movie. And we launched into a 30-minute conversation about Star Wars. It was just clear this motherfucker was hungry. He hadn't had anybody to talk to Star Wars about in years. His Pete King had left him a long time ago as well. So there was nobody talking about Star Wars, and it was something he obviously loved as a child. And here was this dopey little black and white movie where they talk about the Death Star contractors, and this guy was like, you know, you're speaking my language, even though we were two different languages. So Star Wars was like this great equalizer in my life that even created bridges across languages. The international language is not love, it's Star Wars. So when they announced that they were doing the last three, you know, episode 7, 8, 9. And that Disney had bought the entire Lucasfilm catalog and the Star Wars universe. At first, when I heard that news, I was like, wow, why would you buy a dead franchise? And that shows you what a terrible businessman I am, because I'm like, oh, because they're going to make it a living franchise. That's why you spend billions of dollars to buy Star Wars, not because you're like, and now we own Star Wars. You know, next thing you do is, and now we're going to keep making Star Wars. So this part of my childhood gets relit. The ember kind of gets lit up again, where it's just like, huh, this is interesting. I don't care what the motivations were behind them. These movies touched my heart, changed my life, and I was still talking about them decades later. You know, facetiously and jokingly in movies, but still a big part of my childhood, a big part of my life. So much so that when I saw the episodes 1, 2, and 3, I enjoyed them. A lot of people were like, what are you, stupid, blah, blah. I said, no, it's just when I went into them, I didn't go into them the same way I went into the first Star Wars trilogy, because I was like, well, I was a child then. And naturally, those movies were engineered for a child, and they're in my DNA, but like, I'm an adult now. There's no way that I'm going to view those movies through the same prism I viewed the first 3 movies, you know, episodes 4, 5, and 6. You know, because I'm grown up now. So viewed through that limited prism, I enjoyed those movies very much. Like, you know, even Jar Jar, you can make excuses for, because I sat next to kids and they weren't like, this Jar Jar bullshit. This is an abortion of the Lucasfilm universe. They love Jar Jar, you know. They're fun. Just like kids, some kids when I was young loved the Ewoks and like that. So I said, this is a great set of kids' movies. And not in a dismissive way, just like, of course this movie wouldn't mean as much to me as Star Wars and Empire and Return of the Jedi. It couldn't. I'm an adult, very clinical, very academic approach to the whole thing. Especially because I've been working in movies for 2 decades. Then I went to the episode 7 set. J.J. Abrams invited me, sent me an email, and I thought he must have made a mistake. He says, hey man, we're shooting in Abu Dhabi, and I was thinking of you. Are you coming to London anytime soon? Because we're shooting this picture. I mean, you know, he told me later on, he was just like, well, he's going, remember, I met Mark through you. Because I'd done an episode of Dinner for Five, Jon Favreau's show. And they're like, pick your panel, who do you want to talk to? And I had Jason Lee, Stan Lee, J.J. Abrams, and Mark Hamill. So Mark Hamill and J.J. Abrams meet that night and stuff. And so when I was on the set for episode 7, J.J. was like, do you remember like, isn't this weird? Because we were standing in the middle of a set of Star Wars Episode 7. It was a set. It wasn't a series of green screen and blue screens. We were on a set, seeing characters that I haven't seen since my childhood and whatnot. And JJ goes, isn't this weird? Because you introduced me to Mark all those years ago and never imagined it would come to this. I was like, I bet you Mark Hamill never imagined it would come to this. When you met him, he was running around with a giant fist, swinging a bong saber. That's the end of the road. This is amazing. You're making Star Wars. And I wrote him back. I was like, dude, I'm actually going to England, man. We're going to do some shows over there. So I would totally roll up on your set. And he was like, great, and put me in touch with Morgan, his assistant and stuff. And then I said, at one point I was telling Jen, I was like, hey man, I'm going to go see the Episode 7 set. He goes, I didn't realize you and JJ were that tight, she goes. And I was like, yeah, you're right, man. We're not that tight. And I'm a big loudmouth. Why the fuck would he invite me? And then I start going, maybe he meant to invite another Kevin. And it's not a Kevin Smith, but just a different Kevin who's in his email, and he just hit Kevin, and Smith went in instead of like an important Kevin, a Costner or whatever, a Spacey, if you will. So I wrote it back and I was like, just to be sure, dude, I'm coming over and shit, but just to be sure, like, this is Kevin Smith, the guy who made Clerks, right? And he wrote back 2 words. He goes, oh, with ellipses. I thought that was cute. So I go over to see the set. They're shooting at Pinewood Studios. And there's a lot of history there, all the Bond movies, all the British carry-on films. It was Metropolis for Superman back in the day, Gotham for Batman during Tim Burton's era. And now it's home for Episode 7. As you pull onto the lot, across one of the big buildings, it just says, now shooting FVII. So I got there, I signed an NDA, that's what you have to do. They told me that in advance, like, you'll have to sign an NDA. I was like, of course. When I got there, the main office, the Lucasfilm office, there's a poster hanging up, and it's got like a Imperial commander going like this. And the text says, loose lips sink starships. And I was like, that's funny, man. And Morgan, his assistant, was like, he put that up for you. I was like, meaning shut your mouth. So it's on my NDA, so I can't say what I saw. But I'll tell you what I felt, and I can tell you what I saw to some degree, because he had told the world the Millennium Falcon's in the movie. What I saw was a very tactile world. He was shooting a scene on a set that existed. Like, I walked around an embankment, all of a sudden I was in a world. And it wasn't a world of blue screens and green screens, it was a world, a set, Tactile. I watched them shoot an action sequence that looked like a Star Wars movie. Like, I saw weapons that I haven't seen since my childhood. I saw old friends who were never really friends, but I love them more than I love some relatives, people who are my blood. And the whole time I'm still very academic, like, this rocks, he's doing it. Like, what I'm talking about or feeling in my head, or thinking in my head, I wasn't feeling at this point, was this is smart. Like, this movie's gonna make a bazillion bucks because look at all these elements, all the ingredients are here. This is what you wanna see, blah, 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 blah. But, I was flabbergasted to be there. I was like, right on, I loved Star Wars as a kid, still academic. And so JJ's like, tells Morgan, take him to the Stage M. So she takes me to Stage M, and that's where they got the Millennium Falcon, as we've seen online. He didn't show it, other people did, and then he went out there being, come on, come on. So we get to the sound stage, and they turn on the lights, and there it is. And from the outside, it's a bunch of wood and shit like that, and pipes. Looks like a movie set, but once you get inside, it's a fully realized world, tactile world. So we get to the bridge. Same Millennium Falcon door you've seen in every Star Wars movie, the first 3. Same little bridge door that's, on my Millennium Falcon from my childhood and stuff. I walked Han Solo down many times during my childhood with Pete King. There it is. And so Morgan's like, you want to go up? And I was like, oh, can't we? Yeah. And so I put my foot on the bridge and start walking up, and just 10 years just fall off my age. I'm no longer 43. Like I'm 33. Another step, another 10 years fall off. I'm 23, and another step as I'm halfway up and touching the Millennium Falcon of my youth. My just gets dialed back further and further, and suddenly I'm 7 years old again, and I'm no longer looking at this as an academic or clinical. I'm no longer like, yes, this movie will make money because these elements are, and I work in the movie business. All that shit's gone. My career was gone. I didn't think about being a filmmaker. I didn't think about all that from, being a guy who wasn't a filmmaker, chasing. All I got to immediately, just boom, just like that moment in Ratatouille, where my critic eats the ratatouille, and so he goes back to his childhood. Same thing, man. I was like, God damn it, this is for real. You walk around the Millennium Falcon, you can touch it. Everything's been reverse engineered, so it looks exactly like it did, which means some they used to build that don't even exist anymore. It was built back in '76, so they had to like go to antique shops, track down things, trinkets to put in a background of the Millennium Falcon so it looks like the Millennium Falcon you and I know. That kind of care that's put into it, man. This dude pointed out, he was like, if you look at Star Wars, they have bubble wrap on the seat belts. And I never noticed that before. And I looked when R2-D2, when C-3PO's buckled in, and they're on the Millennium Falcon, and he's doing this, he's buckled in. Look at the seat belts, man. There's bubble wrap around the seat belts. That was their idea of like, it'll look futuristic. They put bubble wrap around these seat belts on this one. Like, everything has been lovingly recrafted. I was on the bridge of the Millennium Falcon and I flipped a switch, just like a Han Solo. Oh, it was amazing. I started crying, dude. I was crying, standing there. Morgan was just like, most people just get very excited. I was like, oh my God, you don't understand. Like, I got very emotional, and I wasn't even stoned or anything. So it was a hell of a trip. He's doing it. I mean, I had no doubt. The clinical academic side of me was like, there's no way JJ doesn't make this an amazing movie, because he won't let it fail. He knows it's important. He's kickstarting the franchise. It's beyond that. It's no longer academic and clinical. It's just like, he is remaking our childhood. It's the field of dreams that I walked on. He just leapfrogged, became my favorite filmmaker of the moment, because holy shit, he did something no other filmmaker's been able to do in a long time. That dude made me feel like a kid again. Now, we don't all get to walk on the bridge of the Millennium Falcon, but if he captures just that feeling that I had, it's going to be the highest grossing film of all time.